His father made headlines back in 1956 when he and 4 other missionaries went missing in the rainforests of Ecuador. What the world feared most came to be true. All had been killed by local natives. But this is only the beginning of this strange tale of savage aggression, fear, understanding, and hope. Hello, I'm Ernie Manouse. Coming up next on InnerVIEWS, our conversation with Steve Saint, the true life inspiration for the documentary Beyond the Gates of Splendor. How much did you remember of the story from your own childhood before you got involved in this project?
Actually, although I was only 5, Ernie, I remember quite a bit. You know, it was big excitement, and of course my dad was my hero. So I remember a lot. I specifically remember him flying away and waiting for him to come back, and he didn't come back. Now, the other pieces of what was actually happening to my dad and his friends, you know, I didn't find that out until later.
Yeah. In working through this film, how much of it did you find out that you hadn't known before? Pretty much everything that was revealed in the movie you had known.
Actually, there was quite a bit. We found lots of old footage and still pictures and things that all revealed new things. I went back and read my dad's journals, the journal that he had kept, you know, that told about taking the only man in the tribe that he met on a friendly basis for a ride 3 times in one day. He, named Kiwi, his name was just fascinated with the airplane. So that's something I hadn't known. And then interviewing, I conducted all the interviews both with the members of the tribe who had been there and killed my dad and his friends, and with members of the 4 other widows and my mother, the 5th. And, little bits of information that added to the drama really sometimes impacted me. In fact, sometimes I was left speechless. I thought I knew the story and then found out these little tidbits that took it so much deeper.
Yeah. Let's go back and talk about how your family came to be in Ecuador in the first place.
Well, my dad, in World War II, was in the U.S. Air Force, or Army Air Corps back then, and he was a mechanic and a pilot, wanted to use that, but wanted his life to count for something. My mother was a nurse. They had met after the war, and my mother's in Southern California. They got married, and then this fledgling organization called Missionary Aviation Fellowship asked them if they would go to Ecuador. There were people mostly from North America, but missionaries penetrating into the Amazon area, and they needed a lifeline, somebody that could take them supplies, could take them in, bring them out. And then all the tribes living in that area of Ecuador, in the Amazon basin, had no access to medicine, they had no access to medical care or dental care, and so my dad was also then the lifelink for them, getting them out of the jungles, taking them back, taking supplies to them. And so Dad and Mom knew all these other people, but there was this one part of the jungles where there was a tribe that lived that everybody called the Aucas, which is a derogatory term in the Quechua language that meant naked savages, really. And nobody dared go into their territory because they killed all intruders. But my dad knew that they were in the path of the advance of the Shell Oil Company, and these people had killed oil company employees, and the oil company had gone to the government saying, if you want us to find oil, then you need to get rid of this problem. And knowing, what was going to happen, they were a small tribe but extremely violent. My dad got in touch with 4 friends and said, these people have never had a chance to have a peaceful existence with the rest of the world, and it looked really probable that they would be completely wiped out. So he said, let's go and try to make a friendly contact with them before these others come in.
Now, this tribe, though, wasn't just violent to the outside world.
No.
They were violent within, too.
Yeah, probably still today the most violent society that has ever been studied. a homicide rate over 5 generations that have been studied now of over 60%. I don't know anybody in the tribe personally, my age or older, whose father died of natural causes.
Wow. So these 4 men and your father decide they're going to try and infiltrate the tribe. Now, was their goal to bring religion to them? Were they going as missionaries singly, or were they going for multiple reasons?
Well, multiple reasons. Although the desire to take them, what is called the gospel, the good news, that the fact that God cares and has a plan that He wants us to know and to fit into, was the primary motivation. But they were also concerned about the well-being of these people. And the primary motive here, the initiation of the motive was that these people were not only killing themselves into extinction, which it was known that they were violent. It wasn't known how violent they were, but they did know, Dad and his friends knew what would happen and what had happened with other tribes when the oil companies came in conflict with a little group of people that were trying to keep them from finding oil. And so that was the impetus. That's why they felt they had to go then, and that's what motivated them to go and try to make this contact initially.
When you talk about how violent they were, what was it that led that group of people to be so violent? What have you found was the reason behind all of that?
Well, I think the fundamental reason that they were so violent was that they're extremely egalitarian. Now, I've lived with the tribe, known them almost all my life, and we take government and rules and laws pretty much for granted, and we press against that. Even I do, but these people lived and still live today. There's no law, there's no rules, there's no police, there's no military, there's no way of enforcing any rules. Even if there were rules, there's no penal system, and they have no concept of any of that. So, everybody was totally free to do whatever they wanted, but if I'm free, then you're totally free, and if you decide to come kill me, how do I stop that unless I take it upon myself? So they lived in this culture of fear and hatred, and when you got afraid that somebody else might be going to come and kill you, the smart thing was, if you could build up your anger, go kill them first.
Within the tribe itself, was there any retribution for killing someone? Were you ostracized in any way, or was it just totally accepted?
No, more than accepted. The objective of the men, the warriors, was to become tempo, what they called, to be known as a remorseless killer, that you could go and kill and not have it affect you at all. Because if you finally became tempo, then the chances were better that other people would leave you alone. No, the killing, there were really, now these weren't formal rules, but the several rules that kind of governed the culture was, if somebody does something that you don't like, you ignore it. If you can't ignore it, you kill them. That was the only way of reconciling a conflict. But if somebody kills somebody in your family, then you have the right and the obligation to go kill them or somebody in their family. And if you're smart, then you go and try to kill the whole family, so there's nobody then to come back and continue the vendetta against your family.
Wow. So then your father and these 4 other gentlemen are going in there to try and reach these people, this violent society. Mm-hmm. And where does it go from there?
They knew that they somehow had to distinguish themselves from other outsiders that were coming in for other purposes. So my dad, pilot, he had devised a technique, because there are a lot of places that didn't have airstrips out in the jungles and they needed medicines and things. So Dad had devised a technique that he called the bucket drop, where he would fly his plane in tight circles and let a long line out of the plane, and as the plane flew in circles, the line would cut to the inside of the imaginary cone that he was flying around, and then it would just hang motionless. Then if he would let out more line, he could actually let something tied onto the end of the line down so that somebody on the ground could hold on to it, could retrieve things out of it, put things in. And they decided, if these people, if we want them to know that we want to be friends, a gift is an international demonstration of friendship. So they started giving them machetes and axes that they knew that they liked, because they would go kill Quichuas just to steal one metal machete. The Waorani lived in the Stone Age back then. And so they started delivering gifts once a week after they found a little clearing where they lived. And the Waorani obviously understood the gesture, because they started taking the gifts and then putting their own gifts back in the bucket.
That's the part that surprises me about the whole story, is that they saw the outsiders coming in. Had they been exposed to the outside world enough to know that that world existed outside of their own existence?
Yeah, they knew that there were outsiders, Kawudi, as they call everybody outside the tribe, because they would go and kill Kawudi, or when Kawudi came into their territory, they would spear them, and then they had a chance to look at them. They thought the white-skinned ones were maybe cannibals, and that's maybe why some of us are so white. Some of the others, like the Quichuas or the Shuar, looked very much like them, but were not part of the tribe.
So the tribe's taking the gifts and exchanging gifts, and the men decide it's time to make contact.
Right. So my dad found 2 rivers over from where this little village was, where they'd been doing these gift drops. On the Awinguno, we call it, on the maps it's called the Curaray River, one of the headwater tributaries of the Amazon. He found a beach, a sandbar, that was long enough that he figured he could land on it. So he landed there and then flew the other men in, and they waited. They built a tree house in a tree so that they'd have a place that, that they could get away from attack at night. And then they waited, and 3 days later, just out of the clear, they heard a voice across the river, and this man and 2 women, naked except for a string around their waist, which is their traditional dress, and they would wear a pig-tooth necklace like this, but otherwise they lived naked. They showed up on the far side of this little river and then walked across the river and spent the day there. And this film that has been made, Beyond the Gates of Splendor, it has a lot of that original footage from that original contact. My dad had a little 16-millimeter movie camera, and they acted like, okay, so what's happening today? I mean, they came across, the man was fascinated with Dad's airplane, tried to talk to it, it wouldn't talk back, so then he tried to talk to my dad. My dad couldn't answer him in his own language, so finally he just got in the plane. He had seen my dad flying around the clearing and, making low passes through the clearing, so he got in the plane and Dad took him for a ride. And then when they got over his village, he tried to climb out of the plane. There was no door on one side. He tried to climb out of the plane so the people could see him. So there was, it was the modern world, the 20th century, and the Stone Age coming in contact for the first time.
But then things didn't work out.
Well, there were some things going on inside the tribe, and within this one family group, there were some animosities that were building, and it was leading towards the resumption of killing within the group, and they were expecting a major attack from another part of the tribe. So the oldest man, he said when he saw these 2 young men, the one that came to the beach and another one, beginning to build their tension, he said, if we're going to kill, let's go kill the foreigners. So they came back 2 days later. Instead of continuing friendly contact, they came back and speared my dad and Roger and Jim and Pete and Ed.
Now back home where you are, not home, but back at the place that you were in Ecuador at the time. Yeah, you're home at the place. What's coming back to your family? What are you hearing? What's going on?
Well, my dad, on Sunday, January 8th, and this is all documented in Life magazine and Reader's Digest and newspapers and things from 1956, my dad, nothing happened. They had the friendly contact on Friday. On Saturday, nothing happened. On Sunday, he flew over the village, didn't see anybody there, so on the way back, he crossed the little Tijuana River, looked down, and he saw a bunch of Waorani on the trail. So he called my mom and told her that he would call her at 4 o'clock, that it looked like there were some people on the trail coming to meet them. But he didn't call back at 4 o'clock, so we waited, and the next day another pilot flew out there to see if he could see anything and saw my dad's plane with the fabric all stripped off on the little beach. And then they knew something had happened, but they didn't know what. Took us about a week to find out before a search party made up of U.S. military, Ecuadorian military, and some missionaries went in and found them all speared to death.
And this was a huge story at the time too. It was.
It was in Life magazine on my birthday, my 5th birthday, January 30th, 1956, and then there was another follow-up article later, and then Reader's Digest wanted the book section, condensed book written about this, and it was in newspapers, and lots of books have been written about it, but now finally a film has been made of it.
And the rest of the story, if people think that's where the story ends, that's just where it gets interesting. Your family didn't flee. The families didn't take off.
Right.
What happened next?
Well, my aunt, my dad's sister, my Aunt Rachel, and one of the widows, Elizabeth Elliott, they were brought in contact with 2 women from the tribe who fled from the killings within the tribe, expected to be killed, but said, let's get it over with, came out, weren't killed because they were women, and then were taken to my aunt and Elizabeth Elliott. And my aunt had already been living with a young girl who had fled from killings in the tribe years before, and so she was learning the language, wondering, if there'd ever be an opportunity to meet these people. And these 2 women happened to be aunts of this young girl, and when they saw that she had been living on the outside for years, they said, how is this possible, because she would have been killed long before in her own tribe. And they said, if it's possible to live in peace, then you need to come and tell the people. So she went back into the tribe, but they started asking her questions that she couldn't answer. So she said, I'll tell you what, there's an outsider, foreigner that I've been living with. She's my sister now. And she said, if you promise that you won't spear her, I'll bring her in. She can tell you how to live in peace.
So how did she go in knowing that she wouldn't be speared? I mean, so far, all right, so they say it. The word is,
She went in believing that this was what she should do and wanted to do. She loved Ayuma, and she'd been looking forward to this. If you knew Aunt Rachel, you'd know. I mean, I remember once after she was in there for a while, then she invited me to come in, and I remember one night hearing the Waorani out in the middle of the night calling into the jungles, and I didn't know the language yet, and so I said, Aunt Rachel, what are they doing? And I had to wake Aunt Rachel up, and I said, Aunt Rachel, something's going on here. And she listened. She said, oh, the Anominani, the downriver people in the tribe, they've come to spear us. And she said, but they're saying, we don't spear anymore, so you can spear us, but we won't kill you back. And I'm thinking, I think it's time to go to one of the other houses, flee, we got to do something. And so I said, Aunt Rachel, what are we going to do? And Aunt Rachel was asleep again.
Wow.
And we were living in a house with split bamboo floors. I mean, they could have speared us through the floors. And so I figured, so I went back to sleep.
When did you first make contact?
When I was about 9.
How? How did your mother decided it's okay to bring our child into this?
Well, Aunt Rachel really decided. She had practically raised my dad, and I reminded her of my dad. And Dayuma had a young son who had been born on the outside. His father was Quechua, and so Aunt Rachel, talked to my mom. I remember her telling my mom, she said, I think they know that Steve won't want to grow up and kill them. So she said, I don't think they'll kill him. So they had built a little tiny airstrip there, and I went in a little bush plane. The pilot, dropped me there and took off, and I met these people who had killed my dad. But I was fascinated. I loved them, immediately. I loved their way of life, loved their culture. Of course, it was without most of the killing, but...
At the time that you did that, was there fear? Or were you too young to appreciate that?
Well, I remember being afraid that night that they came, and then I saw Aunt Rachel wasn't... and, I realized later that the people... I was almost as tall as some of the adults at 9. I was getting up to that height, and they had to have believed that when I grew up that I would come back to avenge the death of my dad and his 4 friends. So the smart thing for them to do would have been to kill me, and instead one of the men, Minkai, really adopted me into his family, and I could go and eat. I could use his blowguns, so I knew that I was part of the family, and then I had his protection. Of course, all of his enemies then were, my enemies too.
From that story, what can we learn in the outside world about forgiveness, change? I mean, here you've got a culture that's been around so long doing things a certain way, and within a few short years, this change already happens. What is it that they found that made them be able to behave differently?
Well, Minkai has told me, and I've translated as we've traveled and spoken together, he said, and this is at the beginning of the film, he said, trying to summarize this, he said, we lived badly, angry and afraid. He said, because we didn't know any other way to live. But he said, but when they brought us Wangungi's markings and showed us this better trail, he said, now those of us walking this trail live happily and in peace. Now, it's not everybody by any means. Wangungi was the creator. They knew that there was a creator because they saw creation, but they didn't know that Wangungi had marked a trail, and that it was the authority of the creator saying, I don't want you to kill. That's really what stopped the killing. And then a lot of people said, if Wangungi marked his trail, let's leave our own trail, let's walk this trail.
Explain to the audience to understand how they hear this, how they know that their God has said that this is the path they should follow.
Well, what they call Wangungi's markings, the creator's markings, is what we would call the Bible. And although most of them can't read it, they listened, and some said, yeah, I believe this, I want to follow this trail. And some said, no, I want to stay on my trail. But those that did decide to follow this trail, then they began to understand that Wangungi had risked the death of his son to come and mark this trail for them. As Minkai said, Itota, his blood dripping and dripping, he marked this trail. Now we can mark this trail for others. And he said, and maybe they'll kill us. But he said, but then we'll go at the end of this trail, you come to God's place, he says, and then living happily with God and with those other people that we invite to come with. And he said some people see it and say yes, and some people say no. But he says, but we have to tell people and show them this trail so that if they say yes, then they can follow it.
If there wasn't religion involved in this story, do you think they could have made the change over?
I don't think it's about religion, but it's about Wangungi, it's about the Creator. If there was no Creator, if it didn't involve anything about Wangungi, no, they'd still live. My aunt would have been killed. I would have been killed. If there is no higher authority, then, how do you have trials at Nuremberg? What's wrong with Nazism or anything else? If men just make the rules and men enforce the rules, and like a friend of mine said, one culture says, love your neighbor, another culture says, eat your neighbor, and who's to decide which is best?
Yeah. What do you learn about human nature across the board from this experience?
Well, on a cultural basis, I realize that although we live in the richest, most advanced, freest, corporately freest culture on earth, this is a complex, high-paced, tense society that we live in. But the Waorani, they live totally free, but it's like a soap opera at high speed. It's, there's a tension of different kind. I think that man's relationship to man is a constant struggle. One of the things that brings reason, though, I think, is what the Waorani say. When we understand if there is a Creator who has a plan, and if we all then live within that plan, then it does give us a way to be reconciled to each other, which, I grew up with it, but I love Minkai, and my children call him grandfather.
Because you then brought your family into the tribe too, and your children.
Yeah, and now my grandchildren, some of our children are actually naming my grandchildren for the men who killed their great-grandfather. But, it wasn't ever intended to be part of a story. For us, it's the way we grew up. This movie being made of it was a total surprise.
Ever a fear of them sliding back in their behavior? If that's so ingrained in their culture, and this has been relatively new to them, this way of life, is there ever that fear today?
Sure. A year ago, some friends of mine who have a family who has a vendetta against one part of the tribe that's never been contacted went and killed 23, 24 of them, men, women, and children, just massacred them with spears and guns given to them by outsiders that wanted lumber in their territory. My life has been threatened, but up here we drive on roads. People die up here for business. They die up here. I mean, our troops are dying in Iraq. Life is a temporal thing. It's a passing thing. I think the question is, what are we going to spend our lives on? Not now, how can we save them? I fight that. I've been a businessman most of my life. What is the purpose of business? It's the bottom line. But then, how do we find significance? And that, I think, and is probably the most common denominator that I find with all people, is the search for hope for life after this, and the search for significance in this life. And it doesn't come from money or things. I've came up to live the American dream. Bought a plane, had my business, equipment, employees, and it was great. I loved the competition. But I felt this yearning for more, something now down in the jungles. There's stuff happening down there. I don't know. You've lived. What do you think?
I think that I don't know that I would have the strength to go into what you went into, and the belief that it would turn out all right, if in fact that was a belief you had going in. It amazes me that you could do that and with your family, and yet you're sitting here to say it worked.
But you haven't had the benefit of seeing the benefits that I've seen. My little granddaughter walked by my computer the other day, and I have a screensaver that has Minkai, the man who killed my father, on it. And she said, "Oh, look, Kai." She loves Minkai. When I took her down there, she was a few months old, and the tribe just insisted they wanted to see her. And my daughter-in-law stepped out of the dugout canoe, and one of the women in the tribe took her baby away from her, and we would see her. They'd bring her to nurse and stuff, and that was it. And little Joy Bell, we call her little Jessie Joy, she just felt totally comfortable, and these people loved her.
Well, Steve, an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Right.
Steve Saint. To order a transcript, call 866-652-3378 or send $6.95 to the address on your screen. Please include the name of the guest.